Okay, the right to live independently and be included in the community is recognized as a particular right in Article 19. And all of the rights that are outlined in Article 19, they apply to all disabled people, regardless of how severe their impairment may be and how complex their support needs, their need for support is. And the provision that are outlined in Article 19, many people think that Article 19 only refers to people's homes or what we used to call residential services. That is not true. These provisions, they refer to all services that people have right to under this article, both specific services like personal assistance and assistance in your home and stuff like that, and assistance to go to the movies, to have healthcare, access to healthcare services, all kinds of support for inclusion in the community, to have employment, to recreation, and things like that. But it also requires that people have right to access to mainstream services, like regular healthcare services and all kinds of services that are available to the general public. So it requires that people have access to specific disability services, but also to mainstream community services. So many of the experts that have written about and those who took part in drafting the convention, they view Article 19 as the core of this treaty, because it emphasizes disabled people's rights as right-bearing individuals and not objects of welfare or charity, which we are quite commonly witness to. This article aims to prevent social exclusion and segregation and institutionalization, and it also identifies as institutions also smaller services that are highly regulated and where people do not have possibility to control their own lives. So institutions are not just big places, it's the practices that create an institution, not the size of the place. So it encourages inclusive environments and participation in all aspects of life. And it rejects all of the laws and policies that deprive disabled people of their autonomy and choice. So implementing Article 19 should really encourage and empower disabled people's competencies, identity, and possibilities. The key elements of Article 19 is that people should have a choice of where they live. The reason that is in the convention or in this article is that historically and still today in many, many countries, disabled people have been required to live in segregated, isolated institutions, big or small. And that is still a practice in many, many countries. So the choice of where you live is a key aspect of the rights under this article. And not just where you live, but with whom and where, and that you do not have to live in a specific disability organized residential setting. Besides that, the core is that people should have access to a full range of community services that enables them to take part in all aspects of social and community life. And then disabled people should have access to mainstream community services. These are the key elements of the article. And it recognizes very clearly the right of people to live in the community and take part in all aspects. And Article 19, it requires that countries take effective and appropriate measures. These are sort of the wording of the convention, to facilitate the full enjoyment of the right to live independently in the community with choices equal to others. And states have to, or countries have to take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate disabled people's full participation and inclusion in the community. One of the interesting issues with the convention is that many of the articles are interrelated, so that they should not be looked at in isolation. Article 3 gives the general principles of the convention, and if you look at some other articles, if you're not sure how to interpret it, you should look to, for example, Article 3 and look at the guiding principles that are there to help you understand the rest of the convention. The rights outlined in Article 19 are very interrelated with other provisions and other articles in the convention. Example is Article 3, which I mentioned earlier. And one of the general principles in Article 3 is full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Many of the other articles are interrelated with Article 19. This is true of, for example, Article 26, which focuses on rehabilitation, but not just rehabilitation for its own sake, but it says in Article 26 that people should have access to rehabilitation in order to support participation and inclusion in the community and all aspects of society. And then we have two key articles of the convention. Article 5 that addresses non-discrimination or prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. And it says, for example, that lack of reasonable accommodation is a form of discrimination. So people have a right for reasonable accommodation. And that is, for example, extremely important with all the general community services, that people are not discriminated in their access to community services. And Article 19 is about accessibility. And of course, things need to be accessible for them to be, so that disabled people can have equal access to these mainstream services and to society in general. So these are some examples of how Article 19 is really it's an important intersection with other articles.
What do you consider to be the most important steps that we should take on a national level to implement Article 19? Well, we, as in, of course, Sweden, but I mean the Nordic countries. Also, what are the most? Could you give us some examples of important steps that should be taken to be able to implement Article 19?
Well, I think, first of all, like what you're doing here today, to implement the convention, people have to know about it. If we don't know about it, we will not implement it. So I think it's very interesting how you at Funktionsrätt have been, and other instances, like the Independent Living Institute, have been educating people about the convention. It will not make any change unless we know, what it is in and what the rights are. I think that's the first most important step. And I'm not exactly sure how to make the governments or municipalities follow it or implement it. But the first step is to have a good action plan that is based on the convention. And I think disabled people have to be actively involved. The convention really stipulates in two of its articles, Article 4 and Article 33, that disabled people should be involved. But in making policies and laws and also monitoring the implementation. But in most countries, disabled people are very marginally involved.